It started on an ordinary Sunday, the kind that smelled like burnt coffee and stale routine. Felicia had just finished her weekly grocery run when her mother's voice called her into the living room, brittle with excitement. The tone alone told her something was coming, something that would demand more of her, as always. Her mother was pacing, her eyes alight with that same gleam she only ever had when speaking of Tessa, the prodigal daughter, the golden child, the girl who had once been the center of their universe before she had decided to leave for bigger things. And now, apparently, she was coming home. Tessa's life had unraveled again. The fiancé gone, the job lost, the apartment emptied, and like every other time, the family's world had to rearrange itself around her pain. Her mother spoke of support and healing, as if those words could excuse the quiet sacrifice she expected of Felicia. For 5 years, Felicia had been the one to hold it all together. She had postponed her promotion when their father died, staying home to help her mother manage bills, grief, and the silence that came afterward. She had taken on extra shifts, cleaned every corner of the house, and kept her mother from drowning in debt. She had done it all quietly, believing that loyalty was love. But loyalty had a price, one she didn't realize she'd been paying until that day. The first thing her mother suggested was, temporarily, giving Tessa her old room back. The room Felicia had turned into her sanctuary, the only space she could call her own after years of caretaking. Her mother smiled sweetly, saying that it was just for a while, that it was Tessa's room, after all. Felicia stood there, her shopping bags cutting into her hands, realizing she had become a guest in her own life. By the time Tessa arrived, the house felt smaller. Her perfume lingered before she even walked in, as if announcing her return before her voice could. Boxes filled the entryway, shoes sprawled across the hallway floor, and laughter, loud, unearned laughter, filled the kitchen. Tessa moved through the house like she had never left, making demands disguised as needs. She wanted her favorite meals cooked, the car keys left out, and the good towels washed and folded for her use. Felicia's mother obliged every whim, her tone softer and sweeter than Felicia had heard in years. Felicia watched the scene unfold from the sidelines, invisible once again. It wasn't just the room that was taken, it was her mother's attention, her sense of peace, her place in the home. Every morning, she'd wake up earlier, leaving for work in the dark just to avoid breakfast tension. Every night, she'd return to find Tessa lounging on the couch, complaining about job hunting being emotionally draining. Felicia tried to remind herself that family meant compromise, that Tessa was struggling, that she had to be patient. But patience turned to bitterness when she found her paycheck missing from her purse one Friday, the envelope she kept for groceries and gas. Her mother brushed it off as a misunderstanding, saying Tessa had only borrowed it for now. For now? Those words echoed in Felicia's mind like a promise she no longer believed. Within weeks, her mother had fully reverted to her old patterns, cooking Tessa's favorite meals, laughing at her every complaint, defending every mistake. The same woman who once leaned on Felicia now scolded her for being selfish. The shift was subtle, but devastating. It wasn't that Felicia's efforts were forgotten, it was that they were rewritten. The narrative became that Tessa was fragile and Felicia was cold, that Tessa needed help and Felicia was withholding it, that Tessa's comfort mattered more than Felicia's exhaustion. One night, as Felicia folded laundry on the couch, she overheard her mother whispering on the phone. Her name came up, sharp and heavy. The words, "She's just jealous," and "Felicia doesn't understand family," sliced through the quiet. That night, something inside her shifted. It wasn't anger, not yet, just an ache so deep it felt like silence had taken root in her chest. When Tessa asked for the car the next morning, Felicia handed her the keys, without a word. She went to work early, her mind numb. But during lunch, something unexpected happened. Her boss pulled her aside. There was a promotion opening in another city, one that had been waiting for her for years. It paid double. It included housing. It was everything she once wanted. All Felicia had to do was say yes. But when she thought of her mother, the mortgage, the bills, the guilt, she hesitated. The weight of obligation had always kept her grounded, trapped in the same place, repeating the same cycle. That night, she came home to find Tessa hosting a welcome-back dinner with her mother. Her seat at the table was gone, replaced with a bottle of wine and 2 empty glasses. The laughter was easy, rehearsed. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, Felicia's favorite, though no one had saved her a plate. She went to her room, or rather, her makeshift corner in the den, and stared at her phone for hours, scrolling through the job offer again and again. When she finally closed her eyes, one thought burned through the fog of her exhaustion. If they could replace her this easily, maybe they deserved to see what life looked like without her. And by the end of that week, the quiet girl who had spent 5 years holding her family together started making a different kind of plan, one built on silence, patience, and the kind of revenge that doesn't shout. It simply leaves. The next few weeks blurred together like a bad dream on repeat. Every day felt heavier, as if the walls of that house were pressing closer. Felicia went to work, came home, and repeated the same small acts of endurance. Cleaning dishes she didn't use, fixing meals she didn't eat, pretending not to hear laughter from the kitchen that no longer included her. Her mother and Tessa had settled into a rhythm Felicia no longer belonged to. It was strange how quickly love could turn into background noise when you stopped being useful. She started noticing small changes. Her mother began locking her bedroom door, the one Felicia had once called hers. The mail that used to be handed to her now disappeared from the counter. The family group chat, once full of reminders and updates, now existed only between Mom and Tess. Felicia tried to let it go to focus on work, but the house had a way of pulling her back into the undertow of resentment. Every conversation with her mother ended in guilt. Guilt for wanting space, for needing rest, for daring to think of a life outside that house. Then came the argument, the one that turned quiet tension into open war. It was a Saturday afternoon. Felicia had taken the day off, a rare luxury, to rest and do laundry. She came home to find her mother in the living room, arms crossed, face set. Tessa sat behind her, looking pleased. Her mother accused her of being ungrateful, of hoarding money while her sister was trying to get back on her feet. Apparently, Tessa had found Felicia's small savings envelope in the kitchen drawer, a few $100s she'd been setting aside each week for emergencies. The moment her mother demanded that she share it with family, something in Felicia snapped. She didn't yell. She didn't defend herself. She just stood there, realizing how deep the entitlement ran. For years, she had believed that love meant giving. But here it was, laid bare. Love in her family meant giving until there was nothing left. She walked away, leaving her mother's voice echoing behind her. The walls seemed to vibrate with every accusation, every guilt-soaked plea for loyalty. But this time, she didn't turn back. That night, she sat on her bed, or rather, her small couch in the den, and made her decision. The job offer still sat in her inbox. The deadline to respond was 2 days away. She opened it, heart pounding, and typed a simple, steady word. Yes. For the first time in years, she felt a strange calm. Not happiness, not yet, but the relief of a plan taking shape. The next few days became a secret operation. She started moving things quietly, clothes folded into boxes, documents tucked into a briefcase, and she slowly untangled herself from the house that had trapped her. She didn't tell anyone. Not her coworkers, not her mother, not even her closest friend. It wasn't just about leaving. It was about reclaiming something that had been taken from her, piece by piece, her autonomy. Still, guilt gnawed at her. She'd look at her mother's face, tired but content next to Tessa, and wonder if she was being cruel. She'd ask herself whether walking away made her heartless. But then she'd remember the late nights she spent paying bills alone, the mornings when her mother forgot to thank her, the stolen paychecks, the locked bedroom doors. The balance of kindness and neglect had long since tipped. Then came the final insult, the one that burned away the last of her hesitation. Her mother called her into the kitchen one evening, her tone oddly cheerful. She announced that she had spoken with Tessa and decided Felicia should move out for a while. It wasn't said harshly, just in that patronizing tone that made it sound like a favor. Her mother insisted that Tessa needed stability and that Felicia could stay with a friend until things settled. Felicia didn't respond. She simply nodded, heart thudding so loudly she could barely hear the rest. When she went to her den later that night, half her things were already gone, packed into boxes and stacked by the door. Her mother and sister had done it for her. That was the moment she stopped feeling anything at all. She spent the next 48 hours finishing her plan. She contacted the bank. She changed the auto payments for the mortgage, all under her mother's name now. It had been easy. Felicia had handled the payments for years, so she knew exactly how to transfer responsibility. The next morning, she went to work for the last time, turned in her keys, and collected her final check. She signed her new contract, arranged for her move, and booked a small rental in her new city. By nightfall, her car was packed. She left her cow's keys on the kitchen counter, next to a folded note. Not an explanation, not an apology. Just a short message written in calm, even handwriting. You have everything you wanted now. Take care of it. She drove away before dawn. The neighborhood was quiet, wrapped in that eerie stillness that comes before the world wakes up. In her rearview mirror, the house stood like a ghost, a place that she had once built her life around but no longer owed anything to. As she reached the city limits, a strange lightness filled her chest. The guilt was still there, faint and familiar, but underneath it was something stronger, the sense that she was finally in control. She didn't look back again. And yet she knew this wasn't the end, because people like Tessa and her mother didn't just let go, they demanded the world bend back to their comfort. The calls would come, the anger, the begging, the realization of what Felicia had left them with. But by then, she'd be ready. The quiet caretaker they underestimated was gone. And in her place stood a woman who finally understood that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's disappearance. The first week after leaving, Felicia expected the silence. She expected the missed calls, the unread messages, the quiet that follows a storm no one else knows has started. But what she didn't expect was how peaceful it felt. Her mornings were no longer rushed. Her meals were quiet but warm. She woke up without the weight of obligations sitting on her chest. There was space now, both in her life and in her mind, for things she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Still, guilt lingered like a shadow. Every time she sat in her new apartment, small but sunlit, she thought of the house she'd left behind. She imagined her mother's confusion when she saw the note. She pictured Tessa's outrage, her disbelief that Felicia had finally done something unpredictable. It didn't take long for the phone calls to begin. At first, they were subtle. Her mother's voice, tight but calm, asking where she was and when she planned to return. Then came the messages filled with guilt, accusation, and disbelief. She ignored them all. By the third day, the tone changed. Tessa began calling too, multiple times a day, alternating between rage and pleading. She accused Felicia of abandoning the family, of leaving them to deal with everything. She demanded answers, money, and explanations. Felicia turned her phone off. She had always imagined that walking away from them would feel like betrayal, but now it felt like freedom. Every unanswered call was a reminder that she had finally chosen herself. Meanwhile, back home, things began to unravel faster than anyone expected. Felicia had always been the one who paid bills on time, who balanced the accounts, who kept the mortgage afloat. Her mother had assumed it was automatic, that Felicia's paycheck magically covered it. Now, for the first time, her mother saw the full scope of what Felicia had been doing all along. Within a week, the bank called about missed payments. The utilities followed. The grocery money was gone. The car insurance lapsed. Tessa, who had promised to help out, quickly realized that her mother's expectations extended to her as well. She wasn't used to that kind of responsibility. She had always been shielded from the consequences of her choices. The illusion of control began to crack. Felicia's mother tried to call her workplace, only to learn that Felicia had resigned. She reached out to family members, asking if anyone had seen her, but Felicia had planned this too well. She had left no trace, except for that note on the counter. For the first time, the house that once felt so full began to feel empty. The laughter that used to echo through the halls turned brittle. The energy shifted from celebration to chaos. Felicia heard about it indirectly. Her aunt, unaware of the full story, called to check in. She mentioned that things back home were bad, that her mother was barely holding on, and that Tessa was complaining about bills and chores. Felicia listened quietly, only murmuring that she hoped they'd figure it out. She didn't elaborate, because deep down she knew they would, just not in the way they wanted. She poured her energy into her new job, the one she had waited 5 long years to accept. It wasn't easy at first. She was rusty at being independent, at thinking beyond survival. But with each passing week, she found her rhythm again. Her boss trusted her. Her coworkers respected her. She had weekends off for the first time in years. She started going for walks, cooking for herself, even reading again. Small acts of life she'd forgotten how to enjoy. And yet, her mother's voice echoed in her mind every night before she fell asleep. Not in words, but in the silence that comes from knowing she had finally disappointed the one person she had spent her life trying to please. 2 months passed before she finally decided to check her old email. There were dozens of messages, some desperate, others furious. The tone shifted with each week that went by. The latest ones weren't even angry anymore. They were resigned. Her mother had written, "I didn't realize how much you did. We can't keep up with the house. I don't know what to do." She stared at the words for a long time. There it was, the truth she had been waiting to hear. Not apology, not understanding, just the quiet recognition of how much she had carried. But she didn't reply. Instead, she opened a savings account in her own name, set up an automatic deposit, and started a new file labeled Future. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about recovery. Meanwhile, back home, things continued to deteriorate faster than anyone expected. Tessa's job hunt never went anywhere. She grew restless, frustrated, and entitled all over again. Her mother's patience thinned under the weight of overdue bills. They began arguing, loudly, constantly, the way Felicia remembered from her childhood before she had started fixing everything for them. The mortgage company finally sent a warning notice, then another, then a foreclosure letter. It was only then that her mother reached out one last time, not with anger this time, but with quiet defeat. "Felicia," she wrote, "they're taking the house. I can't stop it. I don't know where we'll go." She read it twice slowly, then closed the message. For years, that house had been her prison, the place where she had given everything and received nothing. She had kept it standing when no one else cared enough to try. Now it was collapsing without her.
And somehow, that felt right, because some things need to fall apart before people realize who was holding them together. In her new apartment, Felicia brewed a cup of tea and stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vengeful. She just felt free. But even freedom, she would learn, doesn't stay quiet forever. Because a few weeks later, a letter arrived at her new address, one that would drag the past right back to her doorstep, forcing her to decide whether she would stay gone or face what she left behind.
It arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked neatly among her bills and subscription flyers, a plain white envelope with her mother's handwriting scrawled across the front. Familiar. Unmistakable. The sight of it sent a strange chill through Felicia's chest, the kind that comes when old wounds remember how to ache. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. Months had passed since she'd last heard from either of them. She had built a rhythm in her new life, steady, quiet, grounded. She had learned to live without their chaos humming in the background. But as soon as she saw that handwriting, the peace she had fought for began to tremble. Inside was a single sheet of paper, creased at the edges and blotched with what looked like water stains. Maybe tears, maybe coffee, maybe both. The letter began simply. Felicia, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but please read this. It went on to describe the aftermath of her leaving. The missed payments had caught up to them. The bank had foreclosed. The house, the one Felicia had spent half a decade holding together, was gone. Her mother and Tessa had been forced to move into a small apartment across town. Her mother's words were scattered between guilt and justification. She wrote about how she didn't realize how much responsibility Felicia had carried, and how Tessa isn't adjusting well. There was a line about how Tessa blamed Felicia for everything, for leaving, for not warning them, for being heartless. But beneath all that, there was something else, something quieter. I think I see now what I did, how I made you feel invisible. I just didn't want to lose both my daughters. But I think that's what happened anyway. Felicia read it twice, her eyes blurring. Not because she forgave her mother. She wasn't sure she ever could. But because it was the first time her mother had acknowledged the truth out loud. The last line lingered. If you can find it in your heart, please come by. I'd like to see you. No demands, no guilt, just to see you. Felicia folded the letter carefully and set it on the counter. She didn't cry. She didn't even feel angry, just numb. For hours, she went about her day in silence. She worked, cooked dinner, and tried to push the letter out of her mind. But it followed her, its words curling at the edges of every thought. She kept picturing her mother sitting in that small apartment, stripped of the comfort she had once taken for granted. And then she imagined Tessa, still blaming, still entitled, still untouched by accountability. It would have been so easy to throw the letter away, to let the past stay buried. But Felicia had spent years running on quiet endurance, and maybe, just maybe, she needed to face this one thing, not for them, but for herself. That weekend, she drove back. The city faded into open roads, then into the familiar suburban stretch she used to call home. It felt strange, like visiting a ghost town that used to belong to someone else. She didn't drive to the old house. She couldn't. Instead, she followed the address written at the bottom of the letter, a small apartment complex with cracked pavement and flickering hallway lights. When she knocked, the door opened slowly. Her mother stood there, smaller than Felicia remembered. Her hair was grayer, her shoulders slumped. Behind her, she caught a glimpse of Tessa, still lounging on the couch, scrolling her phone, unbothered as ever. The apartment was dim and cluttered, boxes half unpacked, bills stacked on the counter. The air smelled faintly of takeout and defeat.
Her mother smiled weakly. It wasn't the same smile she used to wear, the one full of control and certainty. This one trembled. Felicia didn't speak. There was no need. Her mother started talking, rambling about the house, the bills, how hard things had been. She admitted that she had taken her Felicia for granted, that she had built her world around Tessa's needs and ignored everything Felicia had done. But every apology came wrapped in a reason. Every confession softened with an excuse. And in the background, Tessa scoffed under her breath, muttering about how Felicia had ruined everything. Felicia stood there, realizing that some people don't change, they just adapt to new circumstances. Still, she stayed for an hour. She listened, she nodded, she let her mother talk until the words ran dry. Then, when the silence finally settled, she said the only thing she needed to say. I hope you find peace. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was closure, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. She left without looking back. On the drive home, the sun began to set, streaking the sky in shades of gold and blue. For the first time, Felicia felt something like relief, not because she had been vindicated, but because she had faced the storm and walked through it untouched. Back in her apartment, she unfolded the letter one last time. The edges were soft now, the ink smudged slightly from her fingers. She placed it in a drawer, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof of growth. That night she slept without dreams. But in the days that followed, a new thought began to stir. Not about revenge, not about guilt, but about something entirely different. For the first time in her life, Felicia began to think about building something of her own. Something not rooted in obligation or family or fear. Something just for her. And as fate would have it, life was about to give her the chance. Because a week later, she received another letter. This one from the bank. And it wasn't addressed to her mother. It was addressed to her.
The envelope sat on her kitchen table for nearly an hour before she opened it. Felicia had grown cautious of unexpected mail. After all, letters from the past never seemed to bring peace. But this one was different. The seal bore the name of the bank she had once handled payments through, the same bank that had financed her mother's house. At first, her stomach tightened. She assumed it was a mistake, a leftover notification, maybe another overdue notice accidentally sent her way. But as she unfolded the crisp white paper, she realized it wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. The letter informed her that the property she had once shared with her mother and sister, the home she'd kept afloat for years, was officially entering auction. As a prior cosigner and long-term account holder, she had been listed as an eligible early bidder. The property had depreciated, listed now at barely half its original value. For a long time, Felicia just stared at the paper. The irony wasn't lost on her. The house that had once felt like her burden was now being offered back to her, stripped of the people who had made it unbearable. The memories of that house came rushing back. The echo of her father's laughter in the hallway, the smell of her mother's cooking before grief had hardened her, the sound of her own footsteps on the stairs when she'd still believed that love meant sacrifice. It would have been easy to throw the letter away, to move on, to let the past stay buried beneath someone else's mortgage and mistakes. But as she looked around her small apartment, neat, quiet, but temporary, something stirred inside her. Not nostalgia, not vengeance. Something cleaner, sharper, closure. Buying the house wasn't about reclaiming it, it was about rewriting its story. Still, she hesitated. She had worked so hard to start fresh. Was it wise to return to the place that had nearly broken her? For days, the letter sat on her counter, unopened after that first read. Felicia went about her routine, work, grocery shopping, quiet evenings, but the thought followed her everywhere. The idea that she could walk into that house on her own terms this time,
No pleading, no guilt. Then, one evening, while scrolling through her work emails, she saw the latest update from her company's HR department. Her promotion had been finalized. Her salary was increasing. Her benefits expanding. A small note at the bottom mentioned that she now qualified for the company's home ownership program, low interest rates, personal assistance, full independence. The timing was too precise to ignore. By the next morning, her decision was made. Felicia contacted the bank, confirmed her eligibility, and requested a meeting. The process was slow but steady. Paperwork, verifications, signatures. Every step of the way, she felt a strange calm. Not excitement, not revenge, just peace. A month later, she stood in front of the house again. It looked smaller than she remembered. The yard was overgrown, the paint chipped, the mailbox rusted. The curtains were gone, replaced with sheets of paper taped over the windows. It didn't look like a home anymore, just an empty shell. And yet, standing there, Felicia realized it wasn't the house that had hurt her. It was the people inside it. The walls themselves had never betrayed her. They had simply witnessed her heartbreak in silence. She walked through each room slowly, her footsteps echoing. Dust floated through the air, catching in the sunlight. The kitchen counters were bare. The living room smelled faintly of mold. The once beloved family photos were gone, leaving faint outlines on the walls where they used to hang. But beneath the decay, there was still structure, still potential. She could see it, what it could become if she stripped away the memories and replaced them with something new. When the realtor asked if she wanted to make an offer, she didn't hesitate. She said yes, softly, the single word steady and sure. The paperwork took weeks to finalize, but when the call came through confirming her ownership, Felicia didn't cry. She simply stood by her window, watching the city skyline fade into night, and felt an old weight finally dissolve. A few weeks later, she drove back with cleaning supplies in boxes, not to move in, not yet, but to begin again. She scrubbed the floors, repainted the walls, fixed the loose cabinet doors. Each act of repair felt symbolic, like stitching shut an old wound. As she worked, she found herself thinking less about her mother and sister and more about herself, about the version of her who had lived here before, the woman who had given and given until she disappeared. She wasn't that woman anymore. When the house was finally clean, she walked through it one last time, barefoot, the air smelling faintly of new paint and lemon polish. She paused by the window that used to face the driveway, the one she used to stare through while waiting for her father to come home, long before everything had gone wrong. Now the reflection looking back at her wasn't tired. It wasn't small. It was her, whole, grounded, unshakable. Before she left, she placed one thing on the mantel, a framed photo of herself, smiling at her new office, standing in front of the company's building. No family, no titles, no labels, just Felicia. And beside it, she left a note, not for anyone to find, but for herself to remember. This is mine now, not the house, the peace that comes with it. She locked the door behind her and drove away, her heart light, her mind quiet. But she didn't know that her act of closure would soon become the spark of confrontation. Because not long after the sale became public record, Tessa found out. And she wasn't going to let it go quietly.
News travels fast in families, even fractured ones. Felicia found out the hard way, through a voicemail left in a storm of noise and fury. Tessa's voice, sharp and venomous, broke through the calm of Felicia's afternoon like a shard of glass. "Unbelievable," Tessa had hissed. "You think buying that house makes you better than us? You stole it. You waited until we were down to take it back." Felicia didn't reply. She didn't need to. She had spent a lifetime explaining herself to people who only heard what they wanted to hear. But Tessa didn't stop. The calls came daily. Then her mother joined in, not with anger this time, but with pleading. Her tone was softer, more fragile. "Please talk to your sister.
she said in one message. "She's hurting. She thinks you did this to punish us." Felicia let the messages pile up, unread and unheard. Because this wasn't punishment, not anymore. It was freedom. The difference was subtle, but to her, it meant everything. Weeks passed before the inevitable confrontation. It happened one gray Sunday afternoon as Felicia pulled into the driveway of her newly cleaned, half-renovated house. A familiar car was parked outside, her mother's old sedan, and standing by the porch, arms folded, was Tessa. The sight of her stirred something between dread and exhaustion. Tessa hadn't changed. Her clothes were expensive-looking but wrinkled, her expression full of indignation. She looked like someone who had lost something she still believed she deserved. Felicia parked slowly, stepping out with quiet composure. The air between them buzzed with tension. Tessa didn't wait for words. She began to rant about betrayal, about how unfair it was that Felicia had swooped in to buy the house they grew up in. She accused her of cruelty, of manipulating her mother, of being cold. Every sentence was another attempt to rewrite the story. But Felicia didn't argue. She just stood there, hands steady, letting the storm pass over her. When Tessa finally paused for breath, Felicia simply said, "You walked into a life I built and took it for granted. Now, I've just taken back what's mine." The simplicity of it stunned Tessa into silence. Her mother emerged from the car then, eyes full of guilt and confusion. She tried to mediate, her voice trembling, torn between daughters who had long since stopped being sisters in anything but name. She said she understood both sides. She said she just wanted peace. Felicia listened, quietly, realizing how strange it was to feel pity for the woman who had once made her feel so small. Her mother asked if she would consider letting them move back in, at least for a while, until they found stability again. Felicia's heart squeezed, not from sympathy, but from the familiar weight of manipulation. She looked at both of them, the two people who had shaped her life with their expectations and carelessness, and felt something unexpected. Clarity. This wasn't her burden anymore. It never had been. She told her mother gently that she couldn't, that this house represented everything she had to rebuild, not reopen, that letting them move in would turn it back into a cage. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. Tessa muttered something under her breath and turned away. They left soon after, the sound of the car fading down the street like the end of an era. Felicia stood in the doorway for a long time after they were gone, the silence of the house wrapping around her like a balm. The air felt different somehow, as if the walls themselves had been waiting for this moment of peace. In the weeks that followed, she finished restoring the house. She planted flowers in the front yard, lavender, her favorite. She painted the walls soft gray, replaced the old curtains, hung art instead of photographs. She filled it not with memories of what had been, but with pieces of who she was becoming. Every nail, every brushstroke, every quiet evening with a book by the window became a ritual of healing. Sometimes when she watered the plants, she'd see the neighbors glance curiously, wondering who had bought the old family home that used to host arguments loud enough to shake the block. Felicia would just smile. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. Months passed. Her job flourished, her savings grew, her peace became routine, not a fragile thing she guarded, but a sturdy one she built with her own hands. Her mother wrote once more, this time by email. A short note, almost shy. She said she was proud of her. She said she missed her. She said she hoped they could start over someday. Felicia didn't reply right away, but weeks later, she sent back a brief message. "I'm okay. I hope you are too." No bitterness, no guilt, just honesty. It was the kind of closure people rarely get. Not dramatic, not perfect, but peaceful. And as for Tessa, Felicia heard from a cousin that she eventually moved to another city, chasing another job, another chance to start over. Felicia didn't wish her ill, she simply wished her away. The past no longer belonged to her. One evening, Felicia stood on her porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The light touched the windows, turning them gold. She thought about everything she had lost and everything she had gained in return. She realized then that the greatest revenge wasn't leaving them the mortgage or buying back the house or even proving them wrong. It was this: peace, independence, a life that didn't revolve around pain. And somewhere deep down, she knew that if her father could see her now, he would have smiled and said what she had needed to hear all along. "You did it, Felicia. You saved yourself." She went inside, closed the door behind her, and turned off the porch light, not to hide, but to rest. Because her story wasn't about loss anymore. It was about reclaiming everything she had always deserved, one quiet victory at a time.